Good evening to everybody. Welcome to the live chat of the Turkish Association for Landscape Architecture, Education and Science. Tonight we will be hosting Dr. Alan Fetzer from ECLAS, European Council of Landscape Architecture Schools. Now I am waiting for Alan to join in our program. Meanwhile, people are joining our program. We are still waiting for Alan to come in the program. Hello, everybody. Again, we are waiting for our guest, Dr. Alan Fetzer from ECLAS, to join in the program. Alan has not been able to join us yet. We are waiting for her to join so that we can start our program. Yes, now Alan is joining our program. In a few seconds, we will be able to start off program.
Wie heißt er? Eli ist es, genau.
Hi, Betty. Good evening.
No problem.
Very good to see you. How are you, Alan?
Yeah, we were sitting on the balcony having dinner.
Oh,
yeah, some
nice.
friends.
Very
Yeah,
nice.
so ciao.
So, did I interrupt your dining?
No, we're just finished. It's all fine. It's all fine. It was all calculated to fit to this chat.
Okay. Meanwhile, people are coming in the program. So if you are ready, I would like to just introduce the program first and start talking to you. Okay?
Yep.
Okay. So good evening to everybody, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the online chat of the Turkish Association for Landscape Architecture, Education and Science, PEMDER. Tonight, we are hosting Dr. Alan Fetzer, the president of ECLAS, European Council of Landscape Architecture Schools. With Alan, we will be talking about landscape architecture education in Europe and the role or the function of ECLAS in this in all these activities in Europe. Our talk with Alan will be consisting of two parts actually. In the first part, I will be asking some questions to Alan, and in the second part, you will have the opportunity to ask questions using the screen. So please keep your questions to the second part of the talk. I'm just starting with Alan. So Alan, thank you very much for accepting our invitation to be our guest in this program. Most of us, I'm sure, know you, but for those who don't know you, would you please introduce yourself first?
Yes, hello and good evening to the Turkish colleagues. Thank you very much, Veli, for inviting me. It's a great pleasure here to speak to the Turkish community of landscape architecture academics. I hope you can all hear me well. And yeah, I will try to introduce myself and also the work of the European Council of Landscape Architecture Schools. And for us, it's a great opportunity to spread the word on what we are doing. But of course, we had a long-term partnership with the Turkish schools, and we will come back to this later. So about myself, my background is landscape architecture. I studied landscape architecture at the University of Kassel, that's in the center of Germany. And that's a quite interesting place to study landscape architecture because it is integrated with architecture and urban planning. So I just started my studies with the architects in the same class. And so that was for me, I think it was for me the best place to be. And it was also quite critical thinking environment over there in the Kassel school. And that's where I met Dietrich Bruns. Actually, when I was almost finishing my studies, he just came to the school and we just had a small encounter, but that played a role actually also in coming back to the European environment where he was already quite active. When I graduated in 2001 with a master in landscape architecture, I stayed in Academica because I had this nice opportunity to go to the south of Germany, where we started a new international master program. That was a cooperation back then between the universities in Nürtingen, where I am right now. That's near Stuttgart, close to Stuttgart in the southwest, and in Freising, close to Munich. And the third partner was in Rapperswil, close to Zurich in Switzerland. So 3 universities who planned to make a master together, and I was really inspired by this. Already back then, by this cooperation idea and the international goals and the European dimension they wanted to bring into the program. So, and I stayed on because it has been evolving quite nicely, and all the time we have new things to solve in that context. So, basically I'm still there. I then later on, I somehow came back to Kassel to do my PhD because that is, maybe it's also linked a bit to the European story. So when so that started, I think, in 2002, in September 2002, when I had attended the first A-class conference. And I remember that back then I met Nilgün Karadenizli from Ankara University. And I think it was also a very crucial moment for the Turkish schools actually to be involved in the European network. I think it was very good that Nilgün was coming to the conferences regularly since then. And I remember that back then in Budapest was that conference we met for the first time. It was also my first contact to the Turkish schools. Actually in that moment also the Le-Notre network started. It was an Erasmus thematic network which allowed, and it was also the moment when I think Turkey was officially participating in the Erasmus program. It more or less started in this period, 2001, 2002. So Turkey was a full partner in the thematic network, and that was actually the moment when all the Turkish schools appeared and we worked together, and it eventually led us to having the Landscape Forum in Antalya. So that's a bit the story. And somehow I discovered in this environment the value of cooperation, and the internet was just starting to be really a tool or a driver of cooperation and in higher education. So I started to experiment with online seminars. That started in 2007. And then I decided to do my PhD on that topic. So it was an educational topic, educational development. So that brought me back, at least my PhD linked me back to Kassel. So I did that, and in 2012 I finished the PhD. I still stay on in Nürtingen in the program coordination. And in the last years, we did a lot of Erasmus projects by ourselves, and I moved more into the interdisciplinary domain, which is what fascinates me most at the moment. It's not just exploring what landscape architecture has to offer, but what inspires me is really to work with other disciplines towards sustainability. So we have a lot of interesting projects together with the economic department and the business administration and these type of professions which are part of our schools. So we try to understand sustainability also from the business perspective and what landscape architecture can contribute. And really, of course, we also have our thoughts on that, and we hope that we might cooperate on this topic also in the future. Then in, now it's 2020, in 2018, I was member of the A-class board through Le-Notre for really many years, and then I became vice president, and I took over the presidency 2 years ago. And of course, now in the Corona times, our European cooperation is also a bit suffering. Of course, we hope to have a conference this year, but it's postponed as well. But at least the forum was held online, so that's also good.
Okay, we will talk about it. Let's go to the history of a little bit the landscape architecture education in Europe. You know, the first landscape architecture school in the world was started in Harvard University in 1900s. But what about Europe? I mean, when and where the first formal landscape architecture education started?
Yeah, that might be, I think, of course, last year in 2019, we celebrated 100 years of landscape architecture education. That was hosted by the Norwegian University of Life Sciences in Aarhus, nearby Austria. I don't know if any of the colleagues was there at the conference in Aarhus, but it was, of course, a nice opportunity. And we had a clear focus on education and also the history of education. And right now, actually, some German colleagues are putting together a book on the history of landscape architecture education, and which is also a bit inspired by the conference where we had a special track on elaborating this. So it's 100 years plus one now, starting in Norway. So that was, of course, quite early. And of course, it falls together with, let's say, movements in society that are inspired by, of course, growing industrialization and where's the role of humanity and the relation to nature. So, of course, we had a lot of movements in society that were looking for reconnecting people back to nature and also for resolving the environmental problems which started to arise from the industrialization. So that was, of course, somehow a reaction on industrialization. But somehow it took its start in Norway. Of course, we always thought, before we got in touch with the Norwegians, that it started all in Germany because we were quite early too. So in 1929, that was just 10 years later, the University College of Berlin opened an academic education for gardeners, which actually led to an academic degree in garden design. And that was, of course, as well a response to the very rapid urbanization we had in Germany back then, which followed the industrialization after the foundation of the Republic and so on. And there's a name, it's a name called Erwin Barth, which you might wish to remember, who was a very talented landscape architect, and all the Volksgarten, so the gardens for the people, the public parks, which are shaping Berlin until today, they get back actually to these very talented persons. Unfortunately, he died a bit too early in the early 30s because I think he became blind, and then there was also the fascist regime which frustrated him. So actually, he was the first professor for landscape architecture in Germany. And only 3 years later, the UK followed the University of Reading with Delico, of course, but it was more or less the same, I think, the same spirit in which these two programs developed. And interestingly, a personality like Caldera Cabral, he actually studied in Berlin in the program which was already there in the 30s, and then came back to Portugal to found the first landscape architecture program there at the University of Lisbon, a technical university. That was in 1942. That's actually the reason why landscape architecture in Portugal has a very strong own identity, and it has some similarities with things that are done in Germany. And it's very different from what is done in Spain. It's a totally different approach because, of course, they have their own identity, and they had this interesting link by Cabral to the Germans, which is still visible today. And then in 1948, it was Wageningen University, which is, of course, a flagship university until today. So this I would say, I took this from the PhD of Barbara Birli. So if you're really interested in getting into depth into this pioneering phase, that was exactly the topic that Barbara Birli had in her PhD. It's available on ResearchGate. You can read the full paper. And her work was actually also part or emerged from Le-Notre. She was coordinating the Le-Notre projects. And we had in the second Le-Notre project, these pioneers of landscape architecture part, where we asked all the schools to identify who were the persons who actually founded the programs, what were these pioneers who just invented and brought people together to found a program and so on. So she took this information and a lot of first-hand interviews which are in her PhD, and she will also have a chapter in the new book on landscape architecture, history of education. So that's an interesting story. That's more or less the story until the 1950s. And then, of course, after the war and with this economic growth, there was, of course, a bunch of programs that developed in this. It was not just the economic growth, it was also a big investment into education, of course, which was shaping European democracies back then. So that was actually the link between welfare, economic prosperity, and education was, of course, these were the big political goals, and there was a lot of investment. So the big foundation of programs was really between 1950 and 1989 in this, I think in all countries, of course, there was a big growth. And then, of course, we had the political changes with the fall of the Iron Curtain and the reintegration of the socialist states. For example, you can imagine that in order to adopt the German nature protection policy, all the countries of the former eastern part of Germany had to establish new programs, which appeared in 1991, 92, to educate people in these different parts of Germany, which didn't have that before. But there's also very old programs in that eastern part of Germany that have been there before. So yeah, that's was, I think, the third driver after the pioneering phase and the economic growth phase was the political turn that led, and I think that was probably also the phase where Turkey really emerged with the foundation of programs. So it was something which was characterized in the 80s and 90s, so really following from the economic growth which Turkey has actually seen. So it seems to be a reaction to, let's say, structural changes in the environment and in the economy where we somehow find it. So we need to reconnect to nature somehow, and somebody has to do it. So,
After 1990s, we have seen a drastic increase in the number of schools, Ellen, in Europe as well as in Turkey. So nowadays or today, how often, how common are the landscape architecture programs in Europe? Are there landscape architecture programs in all European countries, or only in some of them?
So basically, we have them, I would say, in all the countries, but they might be at a very different stage of development. That depends a little bit on the political culture or the culture of design. So what we understood, I think, from this Le-Notre and Atlas process, and because many members are always, they call us, or they would like to have more standardization and some kind of a European umbrella that says what is right and wrong. But these things are not so easy to implement because we have different academic cultures in which landscape architecture has been established. And there's many reasons for that. But first to answer the question about if landscape architecture exists in all the countries, yes, it does, except for some very small ones. I think Luxembourg doesn't have an own education, so that they're basically importing them from France and Germany. And of course, these very small countries, they might not have it. But I think it's astonishing to see that basically all countries have something, but of course the education looks differently. It makes a big difference. I think in Germany, we have maybe this identity that we see landscape architecture as an engineering culture. You know, German engineering is our big thing. So it has, it's somehow in this identity of being an engineering discipline. So it has its own context, and it is on eye level with the architects. That's also something which is generally agreed. So we can be quite relaxed, I think, and we can be glad that we have this situation. But then you go to our neighbors, and then you might have landscape architecture nested in a forestry school. So they have all these scientists that come with forestry backgrounds, which is really, really important. But it has, of course, it's a challenge to really establishing maybe a design approach, which needs to have also the artistic or creative part of this discipline. Or you have, on the other hand, a lot in the south of Germany. Landscape architecture is somehow embedded in the architecture schools, which might be, maybe countries have a big tradition in architecture, and that is maybe the leading discipline, which is somehow integrating all of this, and then really establishing landscape architecture at eye level with them can be quite challenging because they might be quite established and strong have a quite established self-understanding, then it's difficult to establish something new next to that. But I think the understanding is changing because we see, of course, these rising environmental issues. So I think the understanding for the profession or the interest in landscape is, of course, growing. The European Landscape Convention was another factor which helped here. You also have landscape architecture schools that are nested in arts artistic environments. The next landscape forum will be hosted in Gdansk by the Academy of Fine Arts. So that's also an environment where you can learn landscape architecture. And what is also quite common that you have them somehow associated to agronomy schools. That's basically in the East. So in the former socialist countries, you have these big institutions for agronomy or forestry, and somehow landscape architecture, landscape management was somehow embedded there, which can be a big potential when we consider the challenges we have with biodiversity conservation, the huge impact that that agriculture has on our landscape. So I would hope that these colleagues actually see more the strengths they have actually in a potential cooperation with these disciplines somehow. But I think somehow they feel a bit lost and they would like to have more design and creativity. But maybe if that cannot be achieved, then you have to take maybe, the identity you have in this environment.
Okay. This is also one of the questions already sent us. What are the differences and similarities in landscape architecture education in Europe? You have already answered some part of this question. I mean, the discipline has evolved based on the cultural differences in some countries in forestry, under forestry discipline, in some others in artistic fields. What about the duration of programs? I mean, undergraduate and postgraduate programs. I know that it is not the same in all countries, but there is also the role of the Bologna process in this harmonization or of the program in different countries. What would you say about that?
Yeah, I think the Bologna process was partly maybe a bit misunderstood because I think the idea of the Bologna process was to have identifiable and comparable cycles across Europe. So that was actually what the Bologna process said. But maybe many educational ministries understood it, we have now 3 years for this and 2 years for that. And then, of course, we can make it all more efficient and so. So this was a very painful discussion, I think, for landscape architecture, because we know that in 3 years, it's actually not enough. So and even German programs, they made a struggle, and many of them now ended up with 4 years. Others, are somehow 3+2, but actually all of them are going for 5 years. Then some of them don't have actually a first cycle. They all go for 5 years because they say a true landscape architecture has to be 5 years. So despite all these ideas of having comparability, I think we didn't achieve it because it just brought out, again, I mean, there's different maybe goals a program has. For example, in Germany, we have a clear distinction between programs that have maybe a science-based approach, and they are nested in the universities of sciences. But a lot of our landscape architecture education, I think half of the graduates, they are in universities of applied sciences like ours. And our goal is actually to educate for a profession. Now the problem is that the tasks in the professions are getting more and more complicated, so you should be a bit scientific maybe also to understand them. So somehow the professional education gets on and more scientific and needs also the master programs to be really efficient. Then we have countries like Switzerland that still don't have a German-speaking master program, so they just have bachelors, but the profession is booming. So there's many factors here, I think, that play together. It's not just the length of the study programs, which says something about the quality and about the professional pathways, because there's more factors that are linked to that. It has to do with the professional climate, with the economic climate, the cultural climate, the role of architecture as well. But in general, I think that the bachelor-master distinction helped in such a way that we can give more profilization or profiling to the programs, and also see that the students have the possibility to go for one professional education and then they can specify it in a different direction. So there's more mobility between the programs, which wasn't there before. Or it was before it was more the exception, and today it's more actually the rule that you switch between different locations and so that's actually, I think that's a benefit. But if it has enhanced the quality of education, the entire Bologna process, I'm not really sure. It made a lot of work for everyone, and we still don't have a unique approach.
So there are a lot of discussion going on the Bologna process. You have already mentioned some of them. Okay, let's go to the E-class, Alan, because time is running very fast. It is already 25 minutes, so I would like to have some time for question and answers. I would like to remind all followers or audience that please keep your questions to the second part of this talk. You will have the opportunity to ask the questions. Why E-class was established, Alan? When was it established? So the reasons, the events leading to the establishment of E-class. Could you please tell us a little bit about that?
I should quickly, I have to go back to our E-class website because what we opened at the E-class conference in September was the E-class Memorial Grove. Because meanwhile, the founders of E-class, they are disappearing more and more. And we have now actually some very important people who are not with us anymore. We have them in the E-class Memorial Grove at the NMBU campus. So it's a willow grove, and there's little plaquettes of these people. So what led to the foundation of E-class? Of course, we had a Europe of divisions. IFLA was, of course, as a global association emerging from the experience of the Second World War and of course the divisions you had. They made, of course, already this big step after the Second World War to create an international meeting point. And I think many of the people who have then later decided to have a European section, of course, they emerged somehow from this environment of IFLA. I think IFLA was, of course, the first, let's say, international discourse level where people started to interact and meet. And I think an important driver for us was, of course, the European Union and the increasing environmental dimension of European Union policy. So there was a bunch of people who realized that we need to cooperate more on the European level to make landscape issues somehow more visible. And we see this when you we can come back to this later. When you see what came out 3 weeks ago, the European EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030. So there's much in it for landscape architecture, and this was totally undebatable. I think some 30 years ago, it was about environmental impact assessment and these kind of things. This is how it started. But it became somehow clear that we need somehow a discourse or a cooperation in the EU countries on these environmental landscape issues. And that the cooperation of the schools is important as well. And at that point, of course, we could have had only one association, which is integrating profession, practice, and academia. But somehow the people back then decided to divide. So in 1989, EFLA was founded. It was the European Federation of Landscape Architecture, which was basically there to monitor the European Union and to see and to have somehow influence or information on the European Union policy and to guide this. And of course, the education section could have remained in that association. But the people back then, like, it was Michael Downing, Dusan Orkrinmet of Rome, Helmut Wegwert, they somehow decided that the universities should have their own network. And of course, the Erasmus program also appeared back then, and somehow they made their own pathway. So they divided. And then we had EFLA, and ECLAS was the European Conference of Landscape Architecture Schools. So it was an annual meeting, and it wasn't formally established until 1991, so 2 years later than EFLA. So we have 30 years next year. We have to remember, we have to do some anniversary. And EFLA, as you all know, existed for a couple of years, but then it was merged with IFLA Europe. So it's now the European section of IFLA with that reorganization. So it was also difficult, I think, to merge because they had different identities. And of course, was really, I mean, when this European cooperation then flourished, it was really driven by the fall of the Iron Curtain. So that was, of course, a moment of re-encounter and reconnection, which was maybe unseen before. And that I think that was a very important driver for this, which we might not imagine anymore, that Europe has been so divided in the past, and also Turkey was in our minds very far away, but then all of a sudden became part of the Erasmus program, and of course we were all very close. So I think these are really the values we get from the European Union, that Europe is really investing into this, in making us meet, making us get together, and that has a lot to do with building a European identity. And as you may know, the European Commission has suggested in the new budget line, which starts next year, to double the amount for Erasmus. So also for Turkey, there will be more opportunities to be cooperating. And I think it's, of course, the idea that academic networking should help, of course, in building up the European values, the European identity. So yeah, that's how. And I think it's, of course, it's driven always by people who think beyond what is now. Like you have a valley over there in Turkey who says it's better if you all get connected. We had people back then in the early 90s who thought the same about the European environment.
Yeah, we will come back to the activities of ECLAS, and of course we will be talking about the Le-Notre projects and other activities of ECLAS. But what about the membership? I mean, mainly the schools, European schools, landscape architecture schools are members, can be members to ECLAS. Is there the possibility of being member outside Europe?
Yeah, of course. I mean, there can be individual membership. And of course, there is the membership of, let's say, European countries that have a landscape architecture program, and they form the General Assembly and the decision-making body of ECLAS. So, of course, because we are actually, as our identity, we are the association, and we represent the interest of European landscape architecture schools and study programs. But it doesn't mean that we exclude people who don't. Of course, there's. Of course, we have a lot of international interest in the ECLAS conference. There's always people coming over from CELA or even from Australia or from other countries just to exchange with the European discussion and to build the networks. You can be an individual member if you want. I mean, you also don't have to be a member. You can always come to the conference. You can register to our newsletter. I think for us, the core is the institutional membership, because this is what we want to do. We want to give a platform for the European landscape architecture programs. This includes Turkey, of course, to have a joint voice for landscape architecture academia and to see what's going on in the study programs, in research, and to promote this through best practice exchange and networking. That's basically our main mission, I think. But this doesn't exclude individual people who want to join. That's all okay. But I think as an individual, it's maybe not necessary to join in order to benefit from ECLAS, because as an individual, you would come to the conference probably. You would maybe read this JOLA or just receive the newsletter and be part of the other activities. So, of course, the core is the universities that have their standard membership fee, which provides them also with benefits, just like receiving JOLA, for example. It's the Journal of Landscape Architecture, which I guess you all know as well.
And you have members from Turkey as well?
Yeah, actually it has increased recently again. I just made the small list. So we have Akdeniz, of course, Panti Bartin, Düc, Yeditepe, Istanbul, Cerrapasha, and in Van, Jutsunku. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 at the moment. Yeah.
Okay. Let's go to the activities of ECLAS. Ellen, we have 25 minutes to finish. Maybe in 10 to 15 minutes we can talk about the activities. I know it is not enough to talk about all the activities of ECLAS, but maybe we have to stress a little bit about the outcomes of Le-Notre projects. I know you have also ECLAS conferences and other projects and book projects and things like that. So the floor is yours.
Yeah, of course, as I said, as a member, as the member organization, we need to represent the interests of the schools in the first place. So they want to have a place where they can identify good practice in education and research. And this is usually what happens at the ECLAS conference, which is our annual conference, scientific conference, which is maybe the only place in Europe where you can really meet all the landscape architecture academic colleagues and you can talk about what's going on in education. That's where the Erasmus contacts are made and maybe the project ideas are somehow emerging. So the conference is really an academic event and a very good networking opportunity. And maybe talking also about Le-Notre again. So of course this was an Erasmus network project that was a funding opportunity that was available back then with the idea of creating, of expanding network across related disciplines. And this is actually how ECLAS was able to grow and establish. We really expanded into really many areas where connections haven't been before. And it was a sequence of 3 projects. So Richard Stiles from TU Vienna was basically leading this. And he has his last semester.
Richard also, who is, I think, retiring.
This semester. This semester. And then was the question, what do we do with Le-Notre, because it has actually built into a brand. And so the decision was made that while ECLAS stays as maybe the interest representation of the landscape architecture schools, the Le-Notre Institute would be an institute which is overseen by ECLAS somehow. So it's still part of our institution, but it has its own institutional identity. And the aim of Le-Notre, of the Le-Notre Institute, is now to reach out from the perspective of landscape architecture to look at landscape in the sense of the European Landscape Convention, and as a topic which has to be dealt by many different disciplines. So it's somehow a landscape discourse or landscape knowledge platform which is orchestrated by landscape architects, with the idea to involve agriculture, economy, the arts, engineering, traffic planning, urban planning, everyone who has a stake in the landscape. Because this is actually what the European Landscape Convention wants us to do, and which is what I think is also the future of landscape architecture. So we need to see ourselves much stronger, I think, in this role as being the advocate for the landscape, the one who is really initiating processes, directing processes, doing this leadership for sustainability. So this is where I see the future. And this is something we want to establish with Le-Notre. And so there's 3 things Le-Notre is doing now. Of course, it's already project partner in continuing Erasmus projects. This is how the financing is somehow secured. Then there's the annual landscape forum, which we had it started in Antalya. And
we hosted the first landscape forum.
That was a very good forum.
It was very nice.
And that is really
continuing every year now, and this year we had it online in Bratislava. It was fine, I think.
So it was on the topic of cross-border landscape, which is also important for the Landscape Convention. And next year we will be in the north of Poland, in Gdansk, on the Baltic Sea. And it will be hosted by an art school, as I said, so it's interesting. So it's always the idea to have also an interdisciplinary cooperation with the forum. So the forum is one big thing, and then Le-Notre is also a partner in many Erasmus projects that offer online seminars and online education. So this idea of collaboration and joint teaching events, which now in the Corona times you're all experiencing as something as the new normal. But it has been out there for a while with the idea of bringing people and topics together from European perspective. And actually Turkish colleagues have been participating in this for a while. Actually, I always see Turkish people there in those seminars and participating. Yes, these are the main activities, to have this online education and to have the landscape forum, and also to explore new methodical approaches, how to work with these disciplines. So it's also kind of a staff training. So when you come to the forum, it's really being together with your colleagues in the landscape and seeing what they see and exchanging on concepts and approaches. So it's really a very hands-on training also, which I think is really, really useful. So that you can see that, that this is how some people might not understand why Le-Notre is somehow detached from ECLAS, but the decision has been made to say ECLAS is still representing the interests of landscape architecture. So that's one perspective you can have. And then you have Le-Notre, where we have the interest of the landscape as a whole. And we just try to interact with this because for us, it's about exploring where is actually the future professional development of landscape architecture. This is what we are exploring somehow with Le-Notre. Yeah, and I think the other important project is JOLA, the Journal of Landscape Architecture, which has also been established during the Le-Notre project, I think the second project. So there was a project team with Carsten Jorgensen from Norway, and others who have been active in establishing it. A colleague from France, from Germany. So it was an international team. And so next to the executive committee of ECLAS, which tries to represent all the regions, there's the JOLA editorial board. So it's an independent board. Of course, it's approved by the EXCO, but they are basically running the journal. And you should not forget that it's not an invited journal, so you can always submit papers. So go to the website of the JOLA. You can access it from ECLAS, and it's really a peer-reviewed journal which should have at the focus the work of landscape architects and the design process as a research and knowledge-generating approach.
It is a fantastic journal. I think it has filled a gap in Europe regarding a journal published in English. So it's a fantastic journal. And in addition to the JOLA, I think in the last 2 years, 4 books were published with the support of ECLAS. Would you please a little bit talk about this?
They were actually really interesting book projects, especially because this topic of teaching has been so much of an issue. Of course, there was this 100 Years Conference. So we published 2 new books. One is about teaching landscape to studio experience, and one about, and the other is the Routledge Handbook on Teaching Landscape. Nilgün Karadenis was in the editorial board, so there was an important contribution for Turkey also, or from Turkey, to make this book happen. And I think what is also an important book was the book that was done by Adrie van den Brink and Dietrich Bruns about research methodology in landscape architecture. That's the, and then the first one was the Exploring the Boundaries. It was still within the Le-Notre project. So Exploring the Boundaries is a series of chapters that explore how landscape architecture links to the neighboring disciplines, like art and sociology and architecture and urban planning and agriculture. And we are still, if somebody wants to have the second part, it's still something where we haven't found an editorial group yet. To develop a book that would further explore the boundaries. But having ECLAS book spot projects is a very nice thing, and I can just encourage everyone, if you have a good idea about something which should become an ECLAS book project, because you can build on our network. If you have a call, we would send it out and promote it at all our events. So think about something. Of course, we had a video focus on education. So maybe there's other things, transformative things maybe you want to explore, the political dimension of landscape architecture. I don't know. There's many topics.
Yeah. Well, before the question and answers, I would like to ask you the last thing. I know ECLAS also is being a part of some projects recently submitted to the EU. One of them is about the landscape democracy, and hopefully soon we are going to have another one. Just with fingers crossed. Would you just tell us a little bit about these projects?
So we are doing this actually through Le-Notre. That's another advantage of having this kind of operational institute next to the membership organization, because when it comes to project calls and these kind of things, we do it through Le-Notre, but of course for the benefit of ECLAS, and ECLAS members are actually automatically also part of this. There's 3 of them I would like to mention. So the landscape education for democracy topic started already back in 2015. We had a follow-up. So if you go to that, it's called led-project.org. So this is really about training participatory methods and exploring how landscape architects can actually act in a participatory way. So it's a quite interesting thing. And in the second part, actually, a new seminar is just running now. It will run again in the next spring. And if you have studios or students who are working with communities and trying to involve them in the design and in the goal setting, all these democratic participatory things, you can join. So, because the new course is designed to help actually existing studios where students are working with communities, and to accompany them with the methodologies and the theory training. And at the same time, the different studios or the places where the students are working, they can exchange. So we have, right now, we have Bologna, Budapest, Nottingham, and Uppsala actually connected, and the students are actually also exchanging their experience. So this is about the participation. Then we have another one, which is a Jean Monnet seminar. So Jean Monnet is a program of the European Union which helps to promote the knowledge building about the European Union. And what we do, the seminar is called Landscape Democracy and the European Union, so a bit similar. But the aim is to explain all the European policy domains and funding programs and instruments which are out there and have an impact on the sustainable landscape development. So we are exploring everything from regional development, agriculture policy, environmental policy, the climate adaptation plans, in order to have a deeper understanding about this. And this is running all through the year, always on Wednesdays. And what we are just closing is the Coastal Landscapes project, which was about connecting different schools and locations about the coastal landscapes. And we connected the Black Sea with the Mediterranean, the Baltic Sea, and the North Sea, actually, schools from different parts. So, and these are the opportunities of the Erasmus program. So, because there were the strategic partnerships, the last call of this funding period has just closed. So and we had it in some projects, so we hope that we can really continue with many ideas. But the Erasmus project, of course, or the program will continue, of course, in 2021. There will be more calls, so you should, of course, always hand in applications.
Now I would like to give the opportunity to the audience to ask questions. Actually, there is a question on the screen in German. I don't know whether you are able to read it.
Let me see, how can I see it? Ja. Von Risa Sanka. So it's a question especially about the structure of landscape architecture in Germany. Okay. So I can say that the duration of studies is a bit different depending if you're at the scientific universities. There it is typically 3+2. And when you go to the universities of applied sciences, you find everything between 3, 3.5, and 4. So it depends also a bit on the country structure. Okay. But in general, I think our programs are quite similar in Germany. So there's a high dimension of project work, of course. There's always an internship. So we have usually a very strong relation to the professional practice. So our students, all of them, spend half a year at least in an office. I can say that's maybe a nice thing that at least at the moment the employment situation is really good for landscape architects in Germany because we have a generation shift. So that's kind of we have a shortage of experts. So actually many graduates find jobs quite easily. At least before the Corona crisis, maybe at the moment it might be a bit difficult, but I'm sure it will recover. So I think the programs are quite similar to each other, but I can say that we have this high dimension of projects, of course. And of course, the digital domain is getting more important in the ecological domain as well.
Yeah, and there is another question. I don't know if you are able to read on the screen.
Yeah, I see it.
Yeah, this question from Elif Parlak.
Is there any situation that different institutions focus on different principles of landscape education? Is it something negative or positive? I think it's really important to cultivate diversity, as I just mentioned, or what we experience in the Landscape Forum. The landscapes are, of course, very complex environment, and our societies are getting more globalistic. Our challenges, global challenges, are getting more complicated. So it's never one person that has the answer to everything. So I think it's like we have to keep biodiversity. We have to keep also the diversity of the study programs. So I think it's a very good situation that we have these artistic people who do their education with the sculptures and the painters, and they might have very specific approaches. They might be very good in communicating things. And then you have the other people who have maybe more emphasis on ecological aspects, and they can count the species, and they have these ecological indicators, and they can calculate everything and have very good evidence. The important thing is that they can talk together and make sure that they are all working towards the same aim. No? So really one thing is about having very good evidence and very good scientific skills. So you can really give the evidence to policy, for example. But on the other hand, you always need to find partners. You need to convince people. So you need to build trust and communicate. And so there's a different type of personality you need for this. So somehow, they need to go together and build all these skills together, I think, towards the same goal. That's important.
I think at this point we have to make a reference to our publication, the report on the guidelines of ECLAS on the landscape architecture education in Europe, in which we defined the basic knowledge areas that should be in landscape architecture education. I think this guidelines is very useful for all schools to define their basic approaches, the content of the curriculum, etc. Right?
Yeah, well, that's very good. Yeah, that's on our website you find this. It's called the ECLAS Education Guide, but it's a product of the Le-Notre project. Of course, we had this tuning process where we tried to synthesize all the competence ideas. I think it needs revision, and it's not a stable document. And we had another Erasmus project called EU Land 21, where we actually looked again at the competence and learning lines for bachelor programs. What I wanted to say is that maybe the most important sentence of the ECLAS Education Guide is that the landscape architecture is understood as planning, design, and management. So all these three domains come together. It's not required that all universities, all study programs cover all of these three domains. But at least in one country, it would be important to have them all that you can maybe exchange. So there will be different emphasis. Some might be more design-oriented, more planning-oriented, more management-oriented. But of course, if you want to have landscape architecture in a country, you should make sure that at least one study program is covering this. But somehow the profession is made up of this. And our core is really to make transformation for sustainability. So it's not just about being able to explain something, which the geographers can do very well. They can do it better than us. Sociologists can do it better than us, and biologists as well. But our task is really to take the situation, to decide what is the better alternative, and to make sure that we come to this alternative, that we implement it, that we transform it. Yeah. So this transformative, that's the engineering thing we have in Germany. So this is why we call it engineering, because it's about reconstructing something.
There is a question from Mustafa Artar from Barton University, an ECLAS member school, is about the official recognition, professional recognition of landscape architecture in Europe. What can you say about this? And the question is, what does ECLAS do for this? Of course, we are in dialogue with IFLA Europe, and at the European scale, IFLA Europe is more the NGO that is in charge of this topic. We can just consult on this, because as an educational perspective, we have, of course, the academic, ideas, how we look at programs, and we don't look too much at the professional profile. This is really the charge of IFLA Europe, but we have a joint working group and we exchange on it. And it has been a very long story, because of course there would have been the opportunity at the EU level to build something like a recognized profession, but you need
10 EU countries in which landscape architecture is a recognized profession before you can establish a common education platform, which would then be valid as an invitation at the EU scale. And so far, we never had this number of 10. And then the UK went out. But I was in touch with Margarida D'Abreu, who's now the education officer of IFLA Europe. And she said that now they have the 10 countries, even without the UK. Because there has been some developments, of course, in some countries, and now they will make another effort to come to a European education platform. That's kind of a new project which is now starting. Yeah.
Okay, we have 3 minutes left, Ellen. Unfortunately, I would like to ask one last question from Ankara University, Professor Oğuz Yılmaz, also the vice president of our association. The question is, what is the most important, I would say, contribution of E-class to the field of landscape architecture in Europe? My answer would be Le-Notre project, but of course there are quite many. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I think that this is as diverse as our members are. I mean, we did recently a membership survey in order to revise our strategy. And what I learned from this survey is that, of course, depending on the background of people, they have different expectations of what they would what they would like E-class to do. And what I learned is that everything we do is somehow good, but not all of it for the same people to the same extent. Yeah, there's people who really love Le-Notre and landscape, and they want to have this discussion and transformation and participation and these kind of things. So they're really in that niche. And others really, they say, oh, Jola is the best E-class project we have to publish and these kind of things. And for others, it's the E-class conference. So it's somehow, it depends maybe a little bit on the profile and background of people, what are their expectations to E-class. And I think we are on a good track. I think we should make what we have stronger and consolidate this even more. I don't think we need many more projects. Or there's one project which somehow started at the last E-class conference, which is the European Archive of Landscape Architecture. And this has been promoted by Lili Litschka from Buku, and that might be something we should really, because we have to write our past now. We have to, because it's now 100 years. So we need to we need to start writing our past and have maybe a European digital archive of landscape architecture works. That would be something I think we should really promote a bit more in the future. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay, so people should follow, I think, E-class activities via the website and other announcement media. Unfortunately, we have 2 minutes left. There are more questions, but we do not have for time. Ellen, I would like to thank you very much for being with us tonight and sharing with us very important information about landscape architecture education in Europe and also about E-class. So maybe you would like to say one last word?
Yeah, I just want to say that I hope that landscape architecture will have a great future in Turkey, because like every country, you are facing these environmental challenges, the global challenges, the economic challenges, and I think the landscape has great potential to reconcile and to make your natural foundation secure. So you should become more loud, because I think maybe right now society is becoming more aware of the limits of growth. Yeah. So it's your time, maybe. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good night. We wish you all the best, Ellen.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye-bye.